My parents tried to make my sister the star of my wedding, so my husband and I taught them a lesson they'll never forget. Here I am writing this long tale on my honeymoon, but honestly it feels cathartic to finally get it all out. My husband is more excited about me posting this than he is about the resort drinks, lol. Anyway, I don't have a Reddit account, so this is a throwaway. My husband, the real Reddit fanatic, refused to post it on his main account. When I asked why, he said, "Since it's your family, you should have the honor of posting the story." So here I am, typing away while he looks over my shoulder, ready to chime in. Ever since I can remember, my parents loved my sister more. And I don't mean subtle favoritism, I mean blatant, in-your-face favoritism. If my sister accused me of something, my parents believed her without question and punished me. If I accused her, they'd either ignore it or find a way to blame me too. Even if there was undeniable proof of her wrongdoing, she'd get off with a slap on the wrist and I'd still get scolded for something. My birthdays were never about me. My cake had to be a flavor she liked, but hers never had to be what I preferred. We always went where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be my special day. They bought her bigger gifts, gave her more spending money, and treated her like a princess. As a result, my sister was spoiled rotten. She didn't like me, she just used me as a punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got much worse when we became teenagers. At some point, my sister lost all her friends. I don't know if they moved away or if they just ditched her because she was mean. Either way, I noticed she suddenly had no one to hang out with. My parents never mentioned it, of course. They only bragged about her achievements, never her failures. Meanwhile, they loved pointing out my flaws under the guise of teasing. With no friends of her own, my sister turned her attention to mine. I was fairly popular at school, and she hated that. Instead of occasionally bullying me, she made it her full-time mission to ruin my life. She started accusing me of things constantly, which gave my parents more excuses to ground me. Then she started accusing my friends too, and my parents stopped allowing me to hang out with anyone. Their excuses ranged from, "They're bad influences, according to your sister," to, "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" The only reason I wasn't completely isolated was because of my extended family. My cousins and I were close, even with some age gaps. At a family gathering, they invited me out and I had to tell them I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. When they asked why, my filterless kid self bluntly said, "Because my sister doesn't have friends, so I'm not allowed to have any either." That comment blew up. The adults were furious at my parents. My parents tried to do damage control, but it was too late. They punished me, grounding me for a month, but the damage had been done. After that, they had to let me socialize a little more to avoid another family intervention. Embarrassed, my sister demanded to transfer schools, and my parents immediately agreed, even though it was further away and more expensive. At her new school, she finally made some friends, but instead of going back to ignoring me, she doubled down on her hatred. I had embarrassed her, and she wanted revenge. Her new friends would come over and bully me, and my parents dismissed it as light teasing. I stopped inviting people over because my sister would accuse them of stealing things and my parents would believe her. The only people she couldn't manipulate were my cousins. My parents never pulled this nonsense with family because they knew they'd get called out again. When I got my first boyfriend, I refused to bring him home, but my parents insisted, so I gave in. Big mistake. At one point, he came to find me looking pissed. Apparently, my sister had cornered him, wearing skimpy clothes and batting her eyelashes horribly. She trashed me and hyped herself up, basically throwing herself at him. Disgusted, he ran straight to me. Of course, my sister had a very different version of the story. She told my parents he had hit on her, but she heroically turned him down because, how could I ever betray my sister? Guess who my parents believed? They banned me from dating him. We tried to keep seeing each other in secret, but it didn't work out. Then it happened again with my next boyfriend. Same story, she hit on him, he rejected her, and she lied to my parents. When I pointed out the pattern, my parents used it against me. They claimed I had bad judgment and kept picking terrible boyfriends. After that, I stopped dating. I didn't want to deal with the drama. Meanwhile, my sister finally brought home a boyfriend. My parents treated him like royalty. They wouldn't stop talking about how amazing he was, then he disappeared. Suddenly, he was a manipulative bastard who tricked her. They never explained what happened, and I didn't ask. When my sister graduated, my parents paid for everything: her tuition, her apartment, her expenses. They made a huge deal out of it. When it was my turn, they sat me down and said, "We paid for your sister's college, so there's no money left. You should get a job and wait until she's finished. Maybe then we can afford something for you. Oh, and if I stayed home, I'd have to pay rent, bills, and all my own expenses." I didn't even argue. I just nodded and said, "Okay." My mom seemed disappointed. I think she wanted me to throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to never pay for my education. But I had expected this. I never believed they would help me, so I worked my ass off and got a full scholarship. When I announced it, I made sure to post it on social media first, thanking my parents, of course. Now they couldn't stop me without looking bad in front of family. Initially, they pretended to be proud, then my sister got in their heads. They started saying, "Are you sure you want to go? Your sister is struggling in college and she's smarter than you." I ignored them and left for school. College saved me. I started feeling happy for the first time in my life. Fast forward, I met my now husband. Unlike me, he does not let people walk all over him. He's the type to shut down nonsense immediately. When we got engaged, we planned a small wedding in my hometown. My parents insisted on meeting my fiancé, and I was dreading it, but my husband, excited. He bought a hidden recorder, hoping to catch my sister trying to hit on him so we could humiliate her. Instead, my parents sat him down and said they'd pay for the wedding on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress. They argued it wasn't right for the younger sister to marry first, so my sister should at least experience walking down the aisle, complete with photos, a dress, and a cake. My husband, who usually has the quickest comebacks, short-circuited for a second. Then, instead of exploding, he decided to play along, and that's when our revenge began. I thought my parents had softened with time. Distance had dulled the sharp edges of their favoritism, and despite everything, I didn't think they'd go as far as making my wedding about my sister. But my husband, ever the strategist, had proof, an actual recording of them scheming, and he delivered the news with a damn grin on his face. At first I was stunned, but my husband, bless his petty, vengeful heart, kept me from spiraling. Instead, we had the time of our lives brainstorming ways to screw them over. The ideas ranged from the ridiculous to the legally questionable, so we called in his level-headed brother for a sanity check. He promptly shut down our more extreme plans, pointing out the risk of lawsuits. So we settled on something simple but effective: act like we were on board with their nonsense. Then hire security and bar my sister from entering. But of course, that wasn't all. This wasn't just about stopping them, it was about making them pay for every ounce of emotional damage they had ever caused me. My husband went back to them, playing the dutiful, conflict-averse son-in-law. He claimed that after testing the waters, he didn't think I'd be okay with my sister walking down the aisle before me. However, he, being the peacemaker, was willing to help make it happen. His condition: they had to fund parts of the wedding. That way I'd feel even more pressure to stay quiet when the time came. My parents were surprised, but my sister, she literally started skipping with joy. And just like that, they agreed. But the real genius was the next part. My husband spun a little side story about how, due to some past bad choices in men, their own words, which I gleefully threw back at them, I had become paranoid and controlling, always checking his phone, making sure he wasn't cheating. Because of this, it was imperative that nothing about the plan was ever put in writing. Every discussion about my sister hijacking my wedding had to happen in person. And they bought it hook, line, and sinker. For months, my parents and sister thought they were manipulating me, when in reality, my husband and I were milking them dry. Instead of quietly funding the wedding and staying out of sight, my parents demanded to be involved in everything, which worked perfectly for us. We'd go check out drinks and menu options, pretend to pick the cheapest or second cheapest, then my husband would secretly take my sister to try them too. He'd sigh and say, "Too bad we don't want to abuse your parents' generosity, so we won't go for the best options." Cue my entitled sister demanding the best of everything and my parents, wanting to appease her, stepping in to pay. Same scam with the photographer. Same scam with the flowers. Even my wedding dress became a battle. My parents wanted me in something ugly, not hideous, but something that didn't suit me at all. We had planned to agree and just not wear it, but my mom sent a text confirming I was okay with it. That was a problem, so I had to refuse in writing, standing my ground. My husband went over to smooth things over, and my sister, in peak Disney villain mode, suggested ruining my actual dress so I'd have no choice but to wear theirs. He pretended to agree. Meanwhile, we made sure all communication stayed offline. Whenever my sister tried messaging my husband, I'd respond instead, keeping up the illusion that I was controlling and neurotic. They actually believed it, and for the record, I found the whole thing hilarious. Normally, I'm a pushover, so the thought of being painted as some domineering, scary wife was comedy gold. I egged my husband on every step of the way. Oh, and my sister tried flirting with him. He played along, acting conflicted. And yet, through all this, he never once mentioned the security we'd hired. The plan they thought they had: wait until everyone was seated. Since brides are always a little late, my sister would show up right before me and walk down the aisle first. By the time I found out, it'd be too late. Our plan: make sure she never made it inside. The security guard we hired wasn't just some random guy. He looked the part: big, intimidating, built like a bodyguard, and we made sure he blended in at first, standing by the entrance with a simple name list. As guests arrived, my parents walked in none the wiser. And then my sister showed up in a wedding dress. The security guard stopped her. "You must have the wrong venue," he said. "There's already a bride inside." She lost it. My dad tried pulling the "do you know who I am" routine, threatened to call the cops. The security guard welcomed it. After all, he was hired by us. Meanwhile, my best friend, who was in on everything, rushed inside, making a scene. She dramatically demanded to know why my dad had just abandoned me at the altar. She made sure everyone heard. People were whispering, gasping, and running outside to see what was happening. Some filmed the drama. My dad was pacing, my mom was in hysterics, and my sister was on the floor, scream-crying like a toddler. By the time my husband was summoned, he played dumb beautifully. He denied everything. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. He looked them dead in the eye and said, "Why the hell would I agree to something so insane?" They had no proof because we had made sure of that. The guests turned on my parents and sister instantly. People were berating them, asking why they'd do this, why my sister thought this was okay. They had no good answers. Eventually, they were kicked out. My dad had to drag my sister away because she refused to leave the ground. No one said a word to me about it during the wedding. Instead, everyone went out of their way to be extra nice, hyping up every part of the reception. Probably because, for the first time ever, I wasn't just an afterthought. We partied hard. My husband barely kept up his fake pissed-off act before breaking into laughter. The next morning, we flew out for our honeymoon. Oh, and my parents tried to pay for our tickets, probably to cancel them last minute, but we didn't take the bait. Of course, my sister and parents blew up my phone with calls and texts. My husband insisted on keeping a paper trail, a smart move because eventually my sister snapped and sent me a completely unhinged message. She called me a snake, blamed me for her humiliation, and even suggested my husband was cheating on me with her. My husband, he screenshot everything, her texts, my parents' threats, and sent it all to our family group chat. He played the perfect victim, begging family to intervene before they tried to ruin our honeymoon too. And just like that, silence. My husband is a little disappointed my sister didn't show up at the airport so he could publicly humiliate her again. But who knows, maybe she'll try something even dumber next time. Either way, for the first time in my life, they failed to ruin something for me. And damn, did it feel good. Extra info. I've been asked why they treat me this way, and honestly, I still don't know. I questioned it as a kid, but they denied everything and called me spoiled, so I stopped asking. My best guess, I was unplanned. They struggled to have my sister, so she was their miracle baby, but I came along too soon, probably an accident they weren't prepared for financially or emotionally. Maybe that's where the resentment started, but in the end, their reasoning doesn't matter. What they did to me was never justified. As for their wedding scheme, my husband and I think they never actually wanted to go through with it. We believe my sister had a meltdown over me getting married first since she barely dates, so they threw out that insane proposition, expecting us to refuse. That way, they'd look like the good guys to her while avoiding paying for my wedding. But when my husband accepted, they were stuck. Backing out would have meant facing my sister's wrath.